And welcome everyone to episode 54 of the Drunken Boxing Podcast, coming to you directly from the headquarters of Peking Duck, Beijing, China. We are just a few days away from Chinese New Year over here, and that means one thing: being woken up at 6 a.m. by 6 million people lighting fireworks at the same time. Anyway, I do enjoy Chinese New Year, especially if I stay in Beijing, because Beijing has quite a large population of migrant workers, as do many of the major cities in China. And the Chinese New Year is the period where people go back home to their hometowns to be with their families. So Beijing actually empties out and becomes rather quiet because the people that stay behind are Beijing people as opposed to migrant workers. And I quite like this period of time because the subway is empty, it's quiet, it's peaceful. Most of the time I stay home during this period and just spend time with family, so I quite enjoy this time of year. Let me know down in your comments if you guys celebrate Chinese New Year and what your plans are. Alright, let's get into some Mushin martial culture general news. I've released quite a few in-depth video projects over the last month or so, since episode 53 of the Drunken Boxing Podcast. A couple of them pretty important ones. Episode 4 of the Li Ziming, Last Master of a Generation series was released. And this was the final episode in the series, which featured a in-depth interview with Li Ziming's daughter, Li Quan, who also runs the Bagua Museum. And it includes not only her recollection of her father and his life, but also a tour of the museum. It was a very long, in-depth interview that I filmed about a year ago, and I've just been gradually working on it. It's a very long and meticulous process to translate correctly the interview and add all the relevant background information and supplemental information about things she's talking to. So I'm quite happy that I finally finished this, and I think the series as a whole really does justice to not only Bagua Zhang, but also the legacy of Li Ziming, who was my direct Bagua Grandmaster. So head on over and take a look at that. If you haven't watched the whole series, well, there's 4 parts for you to catch up, and you can get to know a little bit more about the man, the history, and about Bagua Zhang in general. I also released a short clip of my own Shifu, Guoyong, discussing certain technical theories and parts of practice of Xingyi Quan, Bagua Zhang, and Chinese martial arts in general. This particular one features a specific aspect regarding refining skills and practices, so there's a bit of insight over there for you to take a look at. And then I also released an episode focusing on some unique Bagua Zhang weaponry. This was part of the interview I did with Li Quan, but not directly related to her father, that I thought I would just add a little aspect to, where she discusses in specific a Liang-style Bagua Zhang weapon, which is pretty unique. It's called the Ziwu Yin-Yang Jizhua Rui, which are quite unique weapons. They are meridian chicken claw yin-yang blades. Go take a look at those. She also discusses the commonly known weaponry or weapon in Bagua, just a brief overview, which are in general terms for some reason referred to as the deer horn blades in the West, although in Chinese that is not what they're called. They're called the yuanyang yue. Yuanyang are mandarin duck, and the yue are crescent blades. Pretty common. And she explains the differences, their origin, as well as where our weaponry comes from with specific Jizhua Rui, the rooster claw blades, and you can take a look at a couple of those. So there's a video on that. And then I also released a video where I took scenes from the famous movie The Grandmaster featuring Zhang, and I pulled out her performances, rather combat scenes from the movie where she does some Bagua Zhang. She is portraying a Bagua Zhang practitioner in the movie, and she went through some training. But I wanted to highlight over and above the over-the-top dramatic action type, standard movies aspects that were included. I wanted to show that the director, Wang Kar-wai, actually tried to include some legitimate, real Bagua Zhang techniques. So I have highlighted where they are and which ones they are with their traditional names, etc., for you to take a look at in a video that's been released. So go take a look at those. I had quite a lot of fun doing that, so enjoy. All right, let's get into today's podcast. My guest today is Ashe Higgs. Ashe Higgs, originally from New York State, has been living in Tempe, Arizona for quite a while now, and he is a disciple of Sam Chin within the I-Liq Chuan or I-Liq Chuan system. I've known Ashe for some time online. I've seen his work. I've even been interviewed by him in the past for his Falling Leaves Kungfu endeavors, and I really enjoyed talking to him back then. But I must say, this podcast was one of my more favorite, probably my favorite podcast I've recorded to date, simply because Ashe is not only highly knowledgeable on his art, but he's passionate. He's one of the few people that I found a true sense of love and passion, not only for his art specifically, but for the value of the arts themselves, being portrayed in how he explained himself, training, his practices, what they were. He has a very deep understanding of his art that comes from somebody who has legitimately put in the time and effort to train and understand closely with his teacher. And I found it fascinating to see not only the overlaps in aspects related to life direction, but in the arts themselves, and how there are quite a lot of overlaps with arts like Xingyi Chuan and Bagua that I practice myself, not only from a physical and technical point of view, but from a mentality and spiritual point of view as well. So I really enjoyed this discussion. You can find more information about Ashe and his practices at fallingleaveskungfu.com, and I'm sure you can find he's got blog posts there, connections and links to other aspects too that you can contact him through if you're interested. And let's get right into it. I bring you Ashe Higgs. Welcome to the Drunken Boxing Podcast. Ashe Higgs, happy to be with you here today. You're the first podcast of 2024, so Happy New Year first and foremost.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you. I'm glad to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you again. I know that when I interviewed you for my podcast, I had a great time talking to you. It could have gone for hours.
Likewise, I enjoyed talking to you too. And we've known each other, at least virtually online, for quite a while. Although we've never really interacted directly. And that first interview, I think we actually kind of saw that we're more in the same mind and spirit than initially thought. So I was really happy and pleased to find that out.
Agreed.
So I've always seen a lot of your posts, discussions, etc., and I've been somewhat familiar mostly because of your efforts with I-Liq Chuan, and that is your principal art, if I'm not mistaken.
That's affirmative.
Yeah, and you run the Falling Leaves Kung Fu Center. Maybe you can give us a bit of information about your background and what you do.
Okay. I wish I had an exciting story, but unfortunately, it's just pretty boring, pretty straightforward. So I've been training I-Liq Chuan under Grandmaster Sam Chin since December of 2002. So I just celebrated my 21st anniversary.
Congratulations.
With the art. Thank you. It's gone by in the blink of an eye. But yeah, so I started out, first of all, I grew up in a very rural area of upstate New York, about half an hour north of Syracuse. And, when people hear New York, they tend to just think of the city. But there's quite a bit more to New York State, and the area that I'm from has a lot more in common with rural Pennsylvania. In fact, we do have even some pockets of Amish scattered throughout the area. But the climate and the geography is quite the same. It's all right there, kind of nestled in between the foothills of the Catskills and the Adirondacks.
Okay, I've been up to the Adirondacks before.
Okay, yeah, it's beautiful.
Really surprising,
beautiful.
And it's as you said. When you go to New, and I'd always gone to New York because my brother-in-law lives there, and that was in like Flushing. So when he said let's go upstate, and I'm like, all right, more city. What are we? And then it was just some of the most beautiful nature that I've visited. Honestly, it was really, really surprising.
Yeah, I mean, I love the geography. So. But sort of economically, the area has been, pretty depressed for a long time. And, like I said, just the fact that it's fairly rural. I think Syracuse is like the big draw in the area where the university is. It might be like 180,000 people that live in Syracuse.
Oh.
So and actually Sharif Bey is
Yes,
there
I
in
was about to
Syracuse.
say.
Yeah. So
Are you interested in learning authentic traditional Chinese martial arts of I-Liq Chuan and Bagua? Well, if that's the case, the Huajin Online Learning Program is for you. The Huajin Online Learning Program is the premier distance learning program where you can learn authentic arts of Hebei I-Liq Chuan and Liang-style Bagua in a comprehensive and in-depth manner from wherever you are. Featuring over 120 in-depth lessons covering aspects of individual training, technique refinement, forms, application, partner work, conditioning, internal skill building and qigong, and much more. The Huajin Online Learning Program has been running successfully for over 3 years and is highly praised by participants within the program. So start your journey into learning authentic classical Chinese martial arts today by visiting mushinmartialculture.com to find out more or to sign up directly at patreon.com/mushinmartialculture. That is the Huajin Online Learning Program. Enroll today.
but so there wasn't, I was always interested in martial arts, but there just wasn't a lot in the area. And then in 97, I relocated to Arizona. And, at about the time that I turned 21, I thought, oh, I'm an adult now and I can do what I want with my time and money. Maybe it's time that I finally get involved with martial arts. And I didn't know why. I didn't necessarily have a logical reason that I could give you, but in just sort of deep in my gut, I knew that I wanted to do Chinese martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to do some initial research and was, looking around at, basically I checked out every book out of the library that I could find on the subject. And of course started with all of Bruce Lee's books and burned through all of those. And then I kind of moved on to Wing Chun. But none of that was really resonating with me. Right. And then I happened to discover Yang Ming's Yang style Tai Chi book. And once I started to read about how he wrote about the quote-unquote internal martial arts, that was what really started to, spark an interest in the direction that I wanted to go. And so I spent about 3 years in that phase and looking around at the different schools that we had here in town. And I just couldn't find anything that seemed legit.
Right.
I mean, I remember, I'm not going to call anybody out by name, but I went to one school here and, we spent the whole, I went to do the introductory class and we spent like the whole time doing wild horse parts main and just as choreography.
Right.
And which is fair. But then at the end of the class, I said, oh, okay, so that's cool. So what's the application for that?
Right.
And he was like, oh, that's a good question. Let me go get the book.
Oh, no.
So I was like, well, I could learn from a book on my own. What do I need you for? So
right.
Like I said, I spent, a good 3 years looking around for, for an instructor. And then I just happened to hear about a demonstration that was taking place at the Phoenix Art Museum that year, and it just happened. It was a traveling exhibit of Chinese art.
Okay.
And it just happened to coincide with Chinese New Year that year, and so there was a demonstration that was going to be given there, and the guy's name was Chen Rei Tang, and so I went to check it out, and every question that I asked, and by that time I had kind of a long list of, for lack of a better term, technical reference points, right? I was asking him about Fajing and stuff like that. And, stuff that, your average white guy off the street isn't going to just walk in and start asking about. And but every question that I had, he had some kind of an answer for, and then he was also able to demonstrate to me, to my satisfaction, right? Let's just say. And, I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but I'm not a small guy either.
No.
I'm about 6'1", and 225, 215, kind of depends on the. And he is quite a small guy. He's probably about 5'8", and very, very, very thin. And he was able to toss me around at that time like a rag doll.
What was he doing? Was he doing Chen style?
No, he was I-Liq Chuan.
Okay, so he was I-Liq Chuan, all right.
Yeah. And so they, the unit or the museum had just, they had gotten his name from somebody, and so they were like, "Oh, can you come do a Tai Chi demonstration?" And he had learned a variation of Yang style Tai Chi when he lived in Taiwan.
Okay.
And so he was like, "Oh yeah, he had like a handful of students at that time, because there's a small community college here in town called Mesa Community College, and on Sundays." At the time, I'm not sure if it's still going or not, but it was sort of loaned. The campus was loaned in part to the Chinese Linguistic School, is what they called it. And basically it was for overseas Chinese to be able to bring their kids to, and they got exposed to traditional Chinese culture. So there was mostly it was focused on language.
Yeah.
But they were running a Tai Chi class for the adults during that time.
I think that's great, really. I mean, I know there's a lot of Chinese, even not first generation, that are kind of craving to get some sort of connection to their cultural past. So as long as the institutions teaching it are not politically connected, I think it's really, really great, because I think it's a good thing for people to be connected to their cultural roots, in especially languages first and foremost, but then cultural activities too. So.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of interesting too, because in my experience over the years now, let's say with my Sifu, Grandmaster Sam Chin, he's part of the Chinese diaspora, and with his roots are in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and he tells all of his students, because everyone is always, when they're talking amongst the family, everybody's like trying to listen and learn Chinese, and he says, don't listen to us. You can't learn to speak Chinese from us, because they have an absolutely unique dialect.
Yep.
As a combination of Hakka and Mandarin, and it's very, very unique to their area in Kuala Lumpur. And so even he'll tell you that he struggles with Mandarin. So there's definitely like a place for things like the Chinese Linguistic School.
But it's interesting you say that about like the mentality. I mean, it's correct in terms of saying, okay, well, you're not going to learn standard Putonghua, like Putonghua means like
right.
normal or standard language, standard vernacular, which is standard based on who and when, right? Because China's always been little dialects and mixes of people with similar roots and culture, but completely different expressions, dialects, even religious mixing in different parts of China. So I do understand the need to have a standard dialect. I mean, it's the same with, okay, we're going to speak one set of English that you learn at schools, but you go home and speak your own language. I get that. But yeah, I think it's also the beauty of Chinese culture and of any culture, these differences within the little groups. Like I'm Greek, right? So my mom raised me speaking Greek at home, but I wasn't raised in a Greek-speaking country. So I went to school and learned, English and in English, etc. And I kind of, and our Greek is also a particular kind of Greek as well. I mean, you would call it, the mainland Athenians would call it dialect, but anyway. So I think that's also really interesting and nice, and yeah.
Well, and like we Romanize the name, of I-Liq Chuan. That used to drive people nuts on the internet back in the day, because instead of we didn't use Wade Giles, we didn't use Pinyin. It was like very, the I-Liq,
Q, yeah.
and but so it's just kind of part and parcel of that whole experience, right?
Right.
So yeah, I initially started training with Ray, and then in December of that year, he had brought Sifu out to Arizona for the first time, and at the same time he was retiring from teaching because he was an engineer, and he did like custom aerospace tooling, and he had bought.
You mean Chen Rui Tang? Or
Yes.
He was
Sorry.
retiring. Okay.
So he had brought Sifu out for the first workshop here in Arizona, and when I met Grandmaster Sam Chin for the first time, I mean, it's hard to oversell just him as a person, even. He's really an amazing person, and also an amazing martial artist.
And he was staying in Malaysia at that time?
No, he had actually relocated to New York.
Ah, okay.
So he left Malaysia, I think, in the late 80s originally, and he had gone to Belgium, if I'm not mistaken. And he spent a year, I think, in Belgium, and that didn't work out. Because he was actually a chef by trade.
Okay.
And he had a very successful restaurant in Malaysia, and then in Kuala Lumpur, and then things changed, as they do. As they do. So he tried to go to Europe first, and that didn't work out. So then he went to Australia, and he was in Perth. And so he started teaching the Kung brothers over there in Perth. And then after that is when he came to the United States. And so initially he went to Los Angeles. And then he got an invitation to move to New York from Venerable Jiru. So Jiru was a student of I-Liq Chuan in Kuala Lumpur, under Grandmaster Li Quan, which is my Sifu's father.
Right.
So we, of course, we all call him Sijo. So they were both students, in the mid 70s, but when Sifu had left Malaysia, Jiru had also left Malaysia, but he went to Thailand and had become ordained as a monk. And he's
that's
actually
really interesting. I mean, Thailand is Theravada. I mean, it's small wheel Buddhism.
Yeah. Well, he got ordained in two different branches of Buddhism. So he got his training in Theravada, and then he returned to Malaysia, and then he got ordained into Chinese Zen.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And at this time, he was the head abbot of Zhong Monastery in Carmel, New York. And Zhong Monastery, like one of their claims to fame is they have the largest indoor Buddha statue in the West.
Oh, wow.
And what's his name? He's a very famous Western monk. He's done Bhikkhu Bodhi.
Okay, yeah.
So he's there at Zhong Monastery as well. Jiru had invited Grandmaster Samchen to come and basically be like a handyman and kitchen help, and so basically Sifu helped, because at that time Zhong Monastery was unfinished. And so he basically helped finish building the monastery. If you go, like when you're walking up the steps to the Great Buddha Hall, there's like a lot of concrete panels in there that have like a bas relief of like some lotus flowers. And Sifu, if I'm not mistaken, is the one that created the mold
Oh,
on
wow.
that.
I
So
should
yeah,
go
so there's
visit that next time I'm in New York. I mean, there's a lot of places I should go to, I haven't gone to, I didn't know of, and I've been to New York so many times. Yeah, for sure.
it's a very cool place. So where was I? Yeah, Ray, and then that's when I met Sifu, and so Sifu was living in New York already at that time, and and once I met him, like that's what I was saying was that Sifu, as a person and as martial arts, there's really very few people like him. I like to say that he was like Mr. Miyagi and Yoda all wrapped up into one.
That's cool.
And so I was hooked at that point. And when you meet Sifu, there's absolutely no doubt that he is a fighter. And but at the time I didn't know the full extent of his background, which of course over time I became more familiar with. So like in the 70s, the I-Liq Chuan students there, they were fighting in full contact competitions left and right, including up to and including against
Thai
Thai
boxers.
boxers.
Malaysia
Yeah,
was actually one of the proving grounds and battlegrounds for those early Kungfu matches. It was one of the places that had a very lively and thriving environment of fighting. You could call it you could call it a seed of what Sanda tried to put into, but they were really an area that was already doing it way before, in terms of formally doing it way before most of the other Chinese/Asian countries.
yeah. I mean, they have a lot of cool stories and newspaper clippings and all kinds of stuff from back in that time, and I believe it was either 75 or 76, but Sifu went to this one particular. It was the Selangor State Championships, if I recall correctly, and he had it was where you're going to have to fight multiple times in
Yeah.
within the day, and his longest fight was 46 seconds, I think.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so they were all just like first round knockouts, and but in addition to that, he just has this gravitas that I think few people that I've ever met. There's only one other person in my lifetime that I've met that had where I didn't actually know who the person was at first. I went to a martial arts. It was like a business conference in New York. This was about 10 or 12 years back, and I just happened to pass this guy in the lobby, and I was like, "Whoa, who is that guy? That dude has some mojo." And then it turned out it was one of the Machado brothers,
Ah, okay.
and
Did he have all his fingers, or was he the bigger guy or the smaller one?
he was a bigger guy.
So it's probably Higan Machado.
I can't remember for sure, but definitely it was one of the Machado brothers anyway. But but Sifu just has that kind of like
Cool.
magnetic personality that and people just love to be around him, and he just has that very unusual combination of both fighting prowess and wisdom.
I mean, I've only seen him online, obviously, and I've seen videos, but, when I see him talk and whatever it might be about, there seems to be a genuine warmth coming from him as well, which is interesting. You kind of think that's contradictory to the appeal of, or the characteristic of somebody who's a fighter, but I feel there's a genuine warmth from him, and So I think,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. And I think, uh, I mean, I only know him, obviously from 2002 on. So at that point, he had already been at the temple for about 10 years.
Mm.
But his time at the temple, even though he wasn't a monk, he was around the monks all day and had attended, many lectures by the monks and had just a lot of interactions with them. And at that time, Chen Reitong was there at the monastery as well.
Oh,
So that's how they initially met. So,
okay.
and Ray had just a super deep background in all the sutras, and that's why he was there at the monastery, because he basically quit his job and went to live there for, I don't know how long he was there, but he was there for a while just to basically deepen his practice and his understanding. And so he was
Where's
there,
he originally from, Chen Rei Tang?
Taiwan.
Oh, okay.
And so that's where they met, and they were about the same age, and they both had kids about the same age, and they just hit it off.
That's great.
And so Sifu spent, hours and hours and hours talking about his father's martial art
Mm.
with Ray. And Ray was like, "Oh, this is brilliant stuff in the way that he had never experienced before with his previous martial arts training."
Mm.
He says, "You have to teach this because it's such a straight shot, you can say, for everything that we're trying to achieve with meditation."
Oh, okay. From that perspective, okay, that's very interesting. At that
Yeah,
point,
so
had Sam had no Master Sam Chin had no inclination or thought to teach in a main or a professional capacity. He wasn't.
no, not at all. He
Oh,
was basically retired at that point from martial arts.
okay,
Uh, so it was just a matter of them, just talking as friends.
okay.
But Ray was really the one that sort of opened his mind towards the idea of teaching. And so through his experiences there at the monastery, I mean, I think basically, like, he would describe it as like it helped open his heart, right?
Mm,
And that's where you get, I think, like a lot of that warmth,
yeah, yeah.
that really comes through. And so yeah, so then like I said, but once I met him, I mean, that was it. I was all in, and then there was no going back. And so that is basically
Your origin
how,
story.
yeah, that's my origin story, how I got involved with it. And after that is really nothing fancy. Just I just didn't quit,
Okay,
basically.
that's
So
great.
like,
I mean, it sounds it's very. I mean, a lot of Chinese teachers would say the same thing because what you said, like you'd always had an interest in Chinese in martial arts. There wasn't anything around you. You went to Arizona, but you'd always been pulled towards Chinese martial arts. You had your first interaction, which was not satisfactory, but that kind of made you look further. Then you found Chen Rei Tang, and then through him you found Sam Chin. And one might argue that of all the styles that you could have been exposed to in the States, in the West, and even in the Chinese martial arts, you were literally shown as somewhat, which is relatively, we could call it somewhat obscure because it isn't one of the mainstream arts in terms of what people know at the time when you mention Chinese martial arts at the tip of their tongue, right?
right.
And you found the what we could honestly say is the source, right? The wellspring. I mean, it's not as if you were going to a subsidiary of a person. You were going you went straight to the root. And from a Chinese martial art, probably even from a Buddhist point of view, that would be called yuanfen. That would be called destiny. It was like a path that you were inevitably destined to travel and to get to this point. So I know it sounds metaphysical, and a lot of people are like, oh, that just sounds like religious mumbo jumbo. But I actually, my personal experience through life is that there just are certain destinies for people to go a certain path in the martial arts, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah. Being that we've just said that, maybe you can speak a little bit about I-Liq Chuan, about where it comes from, what it is, etc.
Okay, so usually when people ask me what I do, exactly because how you described is somewhat obscure. And so usually I try and tell them, well, no matter what I tell you, you're going to get the wrong idea. So it's better to just come and try it. But if pressed for it, a lot of times I'll say, well, it's more like Tai Chi than Thai boxing, but it's more like Thai boxing than Tai Chi. So its roots Sifu's father, Li Quan, he studied with a few different masters in Kuala Lumpur. So he learned like a Li style Shaolin. He learned an art that is sometimes is translated as a 9-point fist. It was also called like a phoenix, is a feng yang.
I've seen that. It's quite well developed in Malaysia.
And then there's but the core, I guess you could say, of I-Liq Chuan was a style. Well, again, some of the history is a little bit lost, so we're not entirely clear on everything. So just put that out there. But we're pretty sure at this point, because we've been trying to research more, that there was two different styles. There was a master his name was Li Quan.
Okay.
And Li Quan taught, it was like a Feng Yang Xingyi.
Okay.
And a Ruyi Bagua.
Okay.
And the Ruyi Bagua it's not like a conventional Bagua. So, for instance, it focuses a lot more on like finger strikes. But at the time,
is Ray a Chinese name? Ray, is that coming from a person's name?
Yeah, but we're talking about Li Quan now.
Yeah, I know, but the reference to Ray Bagua.
Ruyi.
Ruyi. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Sorry. Ruyi Bagua.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like as you wish.
Right.
So that really is sort of the backbone of what became I-Liq Chuan. And so basically what Sijo did was, because even before he started learning from Li Quan, to my understanding, he was known in Kuala Lumpur as something of like a martial arts genius, like a physical genius. You could show him any form one time, and he could repeat it back to you backwards on the other, like on the left side.
My whole life is a lie.
Are floppy Chinese swords getting you down? Do you practice traditional Chinese martial arts but have difficulty locating and sourcing firm, solid steel training swords? Well, look no further. Available now on the Mushin Martial Culture online store are high-quality, custom-made, hard steel traditional training swords. Made from the highest quality materials, these swords have both the feel and weight distribution of traditional, authentic Chinese martial arts swords, featuring high-quality scabbards, as well as the option to include a historically accurate handle wrap. This sword is built to last. Head on over to the Mushin Martial Culture online store to order yours today. Available as well on the store are other items, apparel, training shoes, and other unique Chinese martial arts merchandise. The URL is mushinmartialculture.com. Ditch the tin foil and get yourself a sword you can be proud
of. So he just kind of had that sort of like physical intelligence. And so after he learned the Fengyang Xingyi and the Ruyi Bagua from Li Quan, he just had like a small group of students. And but basically what he did was he just sort of looked at where all the arts overlapped. And he said, this is the core. Like, this is what you actually need to know. And the rest of it is kind of fluff. And so he sort of abandoned all of that. And really, all at the time, to my understanding, is basically all they were teaching was just spinning hands and sticky hands, like what we call spinning hands and sticky hands.
Which I've seen, yeah.
So if you're familiar with I-Liq Chuan, and they have kind of what do they call it in I-Liq Chuan?
The type of push hands that they do?
Yeah, where it's kind of like spinning hands, but not really.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's kind of like a cross between that and like Bagua, like a traditional, conventional Bagua style Rao Sao.
Right. Rosho.
Yeah. And so, yeah, just the spinning hand, the sticky hand. So basically it was just focused almost entirely on just partner training. And then over time, as Sifu started to teach throughout the world, because about the same time that I started to learn from him, I think maybe just a year before, there was a guy named Alex. He's a Russian, lives in Moscow, and he had a Wing Chun school over there. But he also had like a very successful furniture business. And so he was traveling back and forth between Moscow and New York, and he met Sifu and just went to check him out and was also blown away and decided to give up
the Wing Chun.
The Wing Chun on the spot and started converting his school back in Moscow into an I-Liq Chuan school. And he was, like I said, he was traveling back and forth and staying at the monastery to learn from Sifu. And so at that time, Sifu was just starting to travel around. And basically Alex helped spread I-Liq Chuan through basically all of the Russian-speaking countries, right, in that area. And so he was spending a lot of time in Europe. He was spending a lot of time traveling around the United States, giving a lot of workshops. And so he was, because he'd already been teaching at that point for about 10 years in New York. So he did have a pretty
solid base there.
Yeah, of students that were there. And actually, now that I'm remembering the story more correctly, there was another one of our students. His name was Dave Pandulo, and that was actually what had impressed Alex the most, was because it wasn't just that Sifu had such a high hand, but that the students that he'd been teaching there at the monastery also had a very high hand.
Isn't that just one of the most important things that is often overlooked when evaluating a teacher? I mean, it's great that a teacher might be really good himself, but if he's unable to produce anything, there's people that can be very skilled themselves but unable to hand that down. There's people that are really good at teaching, but maybe they themselves aren't able to do it to a high level. I mean, we've seen this with people like Cus D'Amato. I mean, he produced Mike Tyson. It doesn't mean he's going to fight and beat Mike Tyson.
Right.
And then you get Chinese martial arts teachers, or any arts teachers really, that are both. And for me, one of the more important barometers or tests is looking at a teacher's students as opposed to just looking at the teacher. It's often more important to look at his students, especially if you're contemplating to go study there. So that's
Right.
that's a surefire sign of somebody who knows what he's doing. Because anything can happen to a teacher throughout his life. He might have been very good at one point and been injured. It does not mean that he's unable to hand down the skills. It just means that he himself has some impediment, you know.
Right. Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I that's one of the things that I talk about with my students all the time. It's like it doesn't matter what I can do. What really matters is whether or not I can help you do it too.
Yeah, exactly.
If I can't, it's a waste of time. So yeah, so that's when Sifu started spreading the art around the world. His level just kind of jumped up tenfold. I mean, I probably shouldn't put a number on it like that, and it also changed the art to a certain degree because Suzhou was, from my understanding, unfortunately, I was never able to meet Suzhou before he passed, but I-Liq Chuan in general has a sort of very southern sort of flavor to it. It would have a lot of similarities to like a southern mantis or and so Suzhou was a bit, from my understanding, a bit more linear in that way, kind of similar.
Okay.
But as Sifu traveled around the world and started to refine his own skill a bit more, it became a little bit more round. So they have a different, and Suzhou was supposed to be very, very, very light and sticky. You could never really feel him.
Okay.
From my understanding, whereas Sifu, like you're gonna know he's there. He has a very especially when he was in his 40s when I first started training with him. Just very, it was round, but also very solid. And that's probably one of the things that separates us from some of the well, I guess I shouldn't say. It's one of the things that's distinct about I-Liq Chuan anyway, is that one of our core principles is that you train to meet the force first.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's force on force. In the way that like you would just be trying to overpower your opponent. But the way that we describe it is that before you can talk about yielding and redirecting and neutralizing, first you have to catch the tip of the spear.
Yeah.
And once you have the tip of the spear under your control, then you're free to redirect, that incoming force however you want. But until you have the tip, at best, what can you do? You can try to dodge.
Yeah.
Right? And hope that they don't get you. But once that tip of the spear is under my control, now it's not your weapon anymore. It's our weapon. And so, like I said, is that we train, especially in the beginning, to be pretty heavy, right? We do a lot of mo sao, right? A lot of grinding hand, and trying to be very, very direct and very linear. And that to build up that what we would call a meeting. Right.
Do you have a Chinese term for what they use for that meeting? Is it jie, like intercepting?
No, and that's actually another interesting thing about I-Liq Chuan, is that in its current formation, it's really an English language Chinese martial art.
I was going to ask you that because when you said that your teacher, Master Sam Chin, changed his expression as he was teaching all over the world and further developed it into something somewhat uniquely different to his father's expression, I was going to ask you if his interaction teaching outside of directly Chinese or Asian communities also affected the way he systematically organized and presented the art. And not just in terms of language, but also in terms of creating a structure.
Yeah, 100%. So this goes back to, again, to his time at the temple. And his exposure, to the Dhamma and all his discussions with the monks and his discussions with Ray. If you know much about Buddhism, where they, everything basically is all lists, right? You have the Four Noble Truths, the Eight Noble Path, you have, and so the way that they had everything so clearly documented, right? And so that was one of the insights, basically, that Sifu had during his time at the temple, in combination with the fact that he recognized that he was not going to be able to teach Westerners the same way that he would be able to teach Chinese.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Because like with Chinese, you can just tell them, okay, just stand here for an hour and do this, right? And they won't ask for an explanation.
Yes.
But in the West, we all want to know why.
Exactly.
Why am I doing it? How's it going to work? What's going to come? What's going to happen? And that has good and bad.
Yeah, right? For sure.
It's like that, but that sort of.
I think the good though outweighs the bad, to be honest, in my personal experience.
I mean, I would agree from the sense that I-Liq Chuan wouldn't be what it is today if it wasn't for that.
Yeah.
So
I think the bad really depends on the sincerity and the intentions of the asker more than the idea of asking itself. So
yeah, because we've had over the years, like you start to notice like there's a certain type of individual, and it's like they don't really want to train; they just want to talk about training.
Yeah,
and they'll ask and ask and ask and ask and ask and ask. So that is not so good, right?
My teacher, why I mentioned this, he had a very similar, what can we call it, moment of insight or enlightenment. I mean, he was classically trained. So he was trained by Li Ziming, third generation Bagua. He was trained by Zhao and I-Liq Chuan, old generation, illiterate, hard-ass teacher. There was no such thing as why.
Right.
You just shut up and do it, otherwise you might get a beating.
Right.
And after the release of the movie The Shaolin Temple in China, suddenly there was the period that they called Wushu Re, which was the Wushu fever or Kungfu fever that kind of swept through the country, and everybody and their uncle was suddenly reinterested in Chinese martial arts. We're talking about post-cultural revolution, where it was kind of people like my teacher had to continue in the darkness, and so what happened at Beijing or Peking University was there were some student-formed clubs, different hobbies. I'm sure you have the same thing in all universities around the world. And they wanted, at that point, there was so much interest from the students to learn Chinese martial arts that they contacted teachers in the vicinity that they had known about over the, history, of the area. My teacher lives in the area. He lived most of his life in the area. His teacher, and even Wang Shangjai of Yiquan, lived in the area. So, and there's a connection with my family and Wang Shangjai as well. But anyway, so they contacted my teacher saying, "Would you like to teach Yiquan to the university students?" And he told me, like in the beginning, he walked there and there was a room full. I mean, it was wall to wall. That's how interested people were. And he was really happy to teach there, but these are university students. They're not, lay people or country bumpkins. You know, they were the age of people that were starting to become more educated. So they naturally were asking questions, and he had never been asked questions like this, and he had never asked questions. And he didn't try to stifle their questioning. He simply said, actually, that's a good question, you know. Let me think about how to answer these questions. And then it made him introspect and reflect on the system, systemize it so these questions are answered in the teaching. So that's why I asked you that question. I'm pretty sure had your teacher not been teaching, even if he carried on teaching in Malaysia, the system might not have been organized the way it was had it not been taught to people from a Western mindset that ask and look at things in a slightly different way. It might not have been so clarified, organized, and systemized. It really did this to my teacher, which is, he calls this a positive. He thinks it's a very positive thing. And he also taught a lot of Westerners, and he says, you know, Westerners train hard, harder than most of the Chinese, but they also ask questions and they want to know more deeply. That's a generalized term. Some people are going to say, right. Oh, you can't say that about everybody. He was just speaking in generalities, so please don't get offended. But that's just how it is, you know. And he'll say to me the same thing. A good student is a student who asks questions. A lazy student is one who he likes you to ask him questions. So because he's asked himself those questions since that initial experience way back when made him say, I have to have these answers. It's my responsibility.
Yeah, and so. I think, like from my own experience with teaching now for, about 20 years, you don't know what you don't know until somebody tries to, right? Like when I'm presenting the material, I always do my best to present it faithfully in the way that I heard it.
Right.
And then they don't get it. Right. So then you have to try and come at it from another angle. And so one of I like to use an analogy of like driving, right? And again, because I grew up in a rural area, so, a lot of times it was, you just head down the road for about 2 miles, and then when you see the red barn, you turn right, right? That kind of thing. But that only works if you're starting from my house. If I really know the territory, like I should be able to give directions from anywhere to get to a specific destination, right? And that's how I sort of think of this process. But yeah, so, and I think it was quite the same for him. And I think also, so for instance, we train what we call the 5 qualities of movement, or 5 qualities of movement unification. And we train, the first and primary that we would work on is what we would call absorb and project.
Okay.
Now, absorb and project is quite similar to
spitting and swallowing.
Yeah, itao, itu, yeah, but not exactly the same. And again, this was just some of this refinement of Sifu's skill, where he was like, it's not quite right to use those terms. It's not exactly what I'm trying to get the students to understand. And also, he kind of wanted to get away from like what he called Chinese mysteries.
Right.
He wanted everything to be like engineering almost. He wanted to be very, very direct, very lean and straightforward. And yeah, so and like I said, so because of all of those influences and all those factors, his presentation of what he learned from his father and then refined is basically, it's an English language system. So it's kind of interesting because it's like when people think like, don't you want to go to China to learn, more or whatever? I'm like, my teacher's in New York, and I don't need to speak Chinese because he speaks English, and his system is an English language first.
Right.
And so, at this point, our terminology has been translated into additional languages like German and Russian. And so, but they spent a lot of time trying to get just the right word, especially in Russian, from my understanding, was quite difficult to get like just the right word for them to be able to use, because basically what Sifu wanted was a standardized curriculum that, like, when the students from Russia would come to New York, and the students from Austria at that time would come to New York, when we would all get together every year on President's Day weekend, we have like a big training event.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a big 4-day thing, and people from all over the world come, and we all get together. But what's amazing about it is that everyone is able to train together as if they had always trained together.
Oh, that's great.
Because of the terminology and the transparency. So, which I think is another thing. I don't want to say it's unique to I-Liq Chuan, but it's a defining characteristic of I-Liq Chuan, is that openness and transparency. So, one of Sifu, his favorite sutras is the Kalama Sutra.
Okay.
Which, if you're not familiar with it, is the Buddha's spirit of free inquiry. And basically, to paraphrase it, it says, believe nothing of what you've heard, no matter who said it, whether you have read it in your ancient texts, right? Unless it, until you have looked into it and verified it.
Yeah.
And so this spirit of free inquiry and transparency has always been part of I-Liq Chuan, and that's sort of reflected in the way that the curriculum is structured.
Dragon Body, Tiger Spirit, a translation and explanation of the classic text of Xing Chuan, is available now. This critically acclaimed work presents, translates, and explains the core classical texts of the art of Xing Chuan, many of which have been utilized by other arts, including Taiji Chuan, Bagua Zhang, and others. Available in hardcover, softcover, and ebook versions. Get your copy today from mushinmartialculture.com or from Amazon. Take your practice to the next level with Dragon Body, Tiger Spirit.
So, for us, we really only train like 5 things. So we have our basic exercises, like the Qi Gong.
Right.
We have 2 short forms, right? A 21 form and a butterfly form. Spinning hand and sticky hand. That's it. That's the whole entire curriculum.
Well, it's people sometimes think that more is better, but they fail to realize that usually more is just an extension of core. And you can see this in Xingyi and Bagua specifically, that the core practices are what give birth to everything. In fact, if you just break down all the other subsequent techniques, you'll see, it's actually this core method with that, or this with that, or just this changed to that a little bit. So by practicing the core, you're practicing everything. But if you don't practice that core and you practice everything else, you're going to miss out on a lot. So that's how it should be, in my opinion.
Agreed. And but as part of that, it also means that everyone trains everything from day one. So you're getting like a broad, well, as broad as you can with just those 5 things, but the cross section of the entire art. But of course, it means that when you're doing in the beginning, it's like you're training it like at your beginner level, and you progress through the system, and then you start to become an intermediate, and you're still training the same things, but now you're training it as an intermediate, and also it's built into the system that we teach to learn.
Right.
So, unlike maybe what people might expect of where, you have to go through the whole student curriculum before you start, like the Dan and Q rankings, let's say, from like Japanese martial arts, right? You got to go through the whole Q ranking until you get your first Dan, and then maybe you can start to teach some classes as an assistant instructor.
Right.
But for us, we have like a staggered curriculum. So you would train. So like, let's say, for instance, we have 11 what we call student levels, and then we have 6. Formerly we called them instructor levels, but now we're calling them application levels. But let's just, for the sake of the discussion, we'll just stick with instructor levels for now. And then we have 3 additional, like what you could call like master level.
Okay. Yeah.
Ranks. Those 3, it's good hand, wonder hand, and mystery hand. And you cannot grade for those. They have to be awarded to you, once you've completed the previous 17 levels.
All right.
And it's a combination of, that your skill level has continued to improve, and service to helping to spread the art, all that kind of thing. Okay. So we just go back and we talk about the student levels and the instructor levels. So 17 levels, you would train student level 1, 2, 3, and then you can do your instructor level 1.
Okay.
And then at that point, you're qualified to basically be like an assistant instructor on the previous 3 levels.
Oh, I see. So it's not like the student levels are all completed and then the instructor levels. The instructor levels are gauges for your progression through the student levels.
Yes, and it's also
and that makes sense, and I understand why you changed the name to application levels as well.
Yeah, and it's meant for it to be deliberately recursive.
Yeah.
Right? So you progress through like that beginning material, and then you help to teach it to the juniors. And like that's what I was saying before, is like, you don't know what you don't know until somebody else like basically shines a light on it by trying to ask you, well, what do you mean by that? Or can you show me how to do it? Like, I don't.
Do you know the Chinese word for question?
I do not.
Winti. Do you know the Chinese word for problem?
No.
Winti. So that's it makes sense, doesn't it, right? So, there you go. Questions are problems, and problem solving is the goal of facing a problem. It's not simply question and answer, it's problem solving. And problem solving is how you educate yourself on a subject you should know about. So
exactly. Yeah, so it's like I said, it's designed to be deliberately recursive, so that it's like you've gone through that material, but do you really understand that material as well as you think you do?
Yeah.
Until you start to try and teach it or share it, let's say. You're trying to share it and help the juniors below you coming up so that they can come up faster. And then, that forces you to look more carefully into that material. And I think that's a reflection of, basically Sifu's experience teaching at the temple, and having this insight about, again, this sort of this spirit of open inquiry.
Right.
And so he built it into the curriculum.
It's very good. So the progression through the curriculum is not covering more subject, but depth and refinement of each aspect you already have learned.
Yeah, to a certain extent.
I mean, I'm sure there is further progression, but it's not as focused on simply learning more content as it is on refining and deepening your skills.
Yes.
In existing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like Sifu, sometimes he would used to talk about the art as being like an onion. We're not trying to add layers on. We're trying to peel layers off.
Right.
Trying to get down to the very core, like the very essence. Like sometimes in Chinese when they talk about like the Huan Yan Li,
Yeah.
right? Like you're getting down to like the primordial essence, right? Like the very like what makes everything work? Like where does it come from? How does it work? Down to the very base, down to the origin. That's what Sifu was talk about. Down to the very base. So like I said, he built that into the curriculum in such a way. And so, our basically like just a quick and dirty explanation of the curriculum to just give a little bit more context is the first 2 levels are our basic exercises. Then the 3rd level is our 21 form. The 4th level is the butterfly form. Then our 5th level is when it's not that when you start learning that material, it's when we say you're quote unquote, like qualified, like you've reached the minimum viable threshold for that.
I was going to say threshold. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Like the minimum viable proficiency. And so 5 would be our spinning hands training, and then 6 is when we start to do some moving step training, but or not start, but that's when you would qualify on it, but also including what we would call range and section, right? And a lot more kicking. It's just movement is becoming more and more free. And then 7. So we divide sticky hand training into upper hand and lower hand. And we like to we train upper hand first, basically because it's easier, but also because there's some distinct tactical advantages to having it what we would call the upper hand position, and we can get into that a little more if you want. But sure. Then from there we go into the lower hand, and then we go into the China, and then we go into Sanda, and that's our student level progressions. And then, like I said, you've got the instructor or now the application levels staggered throughout, again, to create this sort of deliberately recursive process throughout the training. So it's like you're never done with the material. It's like you're going to go back and look at it. And that's actually, there's an interesting story about that where I was training with one of the students from Russia one time, and we were both kind of getting burned out. We were running out of neurotransmitters, acetylcholine depletion. Like we were just tired, right? Because this was in one of our intensives. So, it was like a 7-day like training camp basically. And so she's like, let's change the drill that we're working on because I just need a break from this. And the best rest is different work. And so I said, okay, yeah. So then later on, a couple years later, I was having a conversation with Sifu about that particular moment. And he said, no, that is not the way. He said, the way you got to keep on looking at it and looking at it and looking at it until the nature itself speaks. So again, it's like this recursive process of like you're never going to be done with it. You got to go back and look again. So, and again, one of the stories from when Alex was at the temple, and Sifu had checked up on him in the morning, and he said, okay, I'll come back and check on you at lunch and give you some pointers and some refinements. So he'd come back at lunchtime, and Alex was like, Sifu, I'm bored with the basics. Like, show me something new, right? Show me something else. And Sifu said to him, he says, Alex, when we first met, the center of your feet was like the size of a quarter. Now it's the size of a dime. The center of my feet is like a needle. and the center of my father's feet is like the center of a needle. So that's this kind of approach that we're trying to take again, where it's like, a very it's expanded somewhat over the years, but generally still the real meat and potatoes of I-Liq Chuan is, like I said, is just those 5 things. And that's all you're going to train forever for all time.
Well, that's so in line with Xingyi and Bagua, as I'm sure you're aware. That's why sometimes I have people like, okay, I've learned the 5 elements. So what do I do next? I'm like, the 5 elements. What? Yeah, but I've done the 5 elements. Yes, you're going to do... When do I stop doing them? When you're in the ground. That's when you stop doing them. I mean, that's it. So you will learn more, but that's all on top of continually refining the core. You have to continue. And if you don't have time in a day, then don't do all that other stuff. Just do the core. That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, all this, it had its roots because, Sijo used to talk about, like, oh, you have to know your opponent and know yourself. All the, like, basically Art of War, Sun Tzu.
Yeah.
But they still only talked about it in terms of like Tingjin. But through his conversations with Ray at the temple, Sifu had like that moment of insight where he's like, oh, this Tingjin is just, it's a slice of awareness, but it's not awareness itself. And so that's what really started to prompt him to look into the training, to use the physical as a tool to try and recognize awareness itself. And then as part of that, over time, then we started to expand more. So for instance, Jiru, he left Chongyam Monastery, and he's another amazing individual too. I mean, you want to talk about lightning striking twice in the same place. So he moved to Missouri and built a monastery there from the ground up. So I think there was one like kind of farmhouse on the property when he initially bought it, and then he he milled the lumber himself to build some of the and he laid the stones by hand, and it's an amazing.
I think I've either seen something in the last couple of years or read something about him and this exact process that he went through. I don't recall if it was him, but now that you're saying these things, it rings a bell about something that I saw in the last couple of years. I'd have to try to remember where and what it was.
Yeah, I mean, if you come to the U.S., I highly recommend visiting.
Okay.
Again, because it's just another amazing place. And like I said, I mean, he built the whole dang thing stone by stone. And he's kind of like Sifu in that way too, where it's like, I mean, of course, because now he's a monk, so he is a bit different, but you just know that he would be somebody that would be hard to tussle with. And he has a very physical approach to training mindfulness. So when we've done a few retreats there at Maba, because at a certain point in the process, you start to hit a glass ceiling. No matter like your physical abilities. So we should pause there real quick and just in I-Liq Chuan, a lot of times you would translate the characters as like will and like Li as in like muscular force or brute strength. But Sifu uses the terms slightly different, and
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure if that's again because of his dialect. But when in I-Liq Chuan, we often like to call it the martial art of awareness.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, and so E for us means like mental,
Okay.
and B means more is physical,
Right.
rather than like thinking of it in terms of brute strength.
Right.
So it's an approach of mental and physical. Basically, like you could say like mind and body as one.
Yeah.
And so again, so like I was saying, is that Jiru has a very physical approach to training. Like you're using the body to train the mind. And as you progress through the system, or at least in my experience, like my experience of progressing through the system was that I started to bump up against, like I said, a glass ceiling where it wasn't going to be just more physical training that helped me break through to the next level, but because it was the awareness itself that was not like sharp enough yet. Sifu talks about trying to develop this mental state of stillness and clarity.
Right.
To the point, like I said, where he say that the nature itself speaks to you. So one of the things about I-Liq Chuan when we train is that we have 0 techniques
Okay.
that we train, right? But you still learn how to have these like applications, basically. So it's like if you're not going to have a technique, then how are you going to know what to do, right? And it's one of the things where it's hard to wrap your head around in the beginning until you reach like a certain point of where you're like, oh, it's so clear, or so obvious, right? And so basically, like what we're going to try and look for is all just comes down to what we would call full and empty.
Okay.
So if anybody's interested, I have a bunch of articles on my
And we'll put the
blog.
links.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll put the links
and
up.
so there's one, and I'm getting ready to revise it heavily right now. But it's basically the truth about Bruce Lee's "Be Like Water" quote.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, he did mention those things. I mean, he used slightly different terms. Substantial and insubstantial, I think, were the terms that Bruce Lee often used, and it's it's a term that I quite like in terms of empty and full, because sometimes people kind of take them too literally, empty and full. But I guess
Right.
it just depends on the explanation. But yeah, he did mention as well, substantial and insubstantial.
So for us, basically, it all is going to come down to pressure. And so we talk about what we call 3 qualities of engagement. So the first one is circle to center. The second one is center to center. And then the third one is center with cross.
Okay.
So circle to center is what I was talking about at the beginning of the interview when I was saying, or
Meet
I
the
guess,
force.
yeah, meet the force. You have to go direct. And meet means like at 90 degrees
Right.
to the point of contact, because you can't have more friction than 90 degrees. So, and then from there, then we go center to center. And again, this also is direct, right? Like you're trying to connect from wherever that point of contact is to the center of the next joint in the kinetic chain, right? Until you can connect or expand your network, we would say, like down to where you can feel your opponent's feet.
The root.
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
Like in the sense of like radar or like a spider web. So, but it's the center with cross of where things really start to get interesting. And where you start to see full and empty.
Right.
Because the point, right? I mean, as human beings, like we don't have any like flat edges, right? So everything has a little bit of a curve to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that means at the top of the curve somewhere, there's going to be like a high point.
Yeah.
And the pressure, right? Or let's just say, even if we're not talking about physically, let's just talk about, so, you know, we like to use the term fullness. Similar
Maximum fullness, right, at that
yeah,
point
and
there.
it's similar to peng, but not exactly. So that's why, again, why we use the term fullness.
Yeah, yeah.
It's my shield, right? But my shield has a curve to it.
Right.
Or even, you know, has an upper limit, right? And a lower limit. So there's like a high point or like a halfway line that's created by my shield. So, and my shield is all just created through pressure and angles, right? So it's not like a magical, it's not woo. You know, we do tend to use a lot of the word energy a lot of times, but really when we say energy, like what we're usually referring to is like the sum total of multiple qualities, right?
Okay.
That gives you like this energy or that energy, but we don't mean it in a we don't mean it like in a mystical kind of way.
Yes,
right? It's just a shorthand.
So shorthand for something that is actually defined.
Right.
It's not undefined.
Yeah, and too complex to define it fully every time, right?
Right.
So,
but that top of the arc or the shield that you were talking about, that point right there, I mean, that's somewhat similar to the idea of absolute value, right?
tell me more.
If you look at an arc on a graph, absolute value is the maximal point. Any deviation to either side, it starts to lessen.
Yes, it's the highest point.
The highest point, exactly there. So that's the optimal maximum point.
Right, and that's where your fullness is.
That's fullness, and anything off of that, it starts to lessen.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or you can say that if there's, depending on the angle, that on one side or the other, pressure will be either higher or lower.
Or lower. Exactly that. It's exactly that, yeah.
And where pressure is high is full, and where pressure is low is empty.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's your, you know, so it's like you're looking to always flow into that empty. Like water, right? Water just flows from the high, it flows around and flows into the empty. Unless there's enough pressure, right, like a tidal wave, that it can just crash.
Break. Yeah.
And just sweep you off, right? So again, like I said, it's like I'm a bigger guy. If I'm with somebody who's smaller than me, and I know I can feel based on the pressure differential between me and them that I have more power, I can just sweep them off.
Well, yeah, that's very interesting. My teacher would use similar ideas and terminologies to explain aspects related to the 5 elements. I don't know how familiar you are with Xingyi's 5 elements of Pizhuan Beng Pao Heng. So it's metal, water, wood, fire, and earth, right? And there's a creative cycle, but there's a destructive cycle. So the destructive cycle would be which element can counter or work against another element. And if we use the elemental terms, for example, wood is Beng Quan. Its weakness is metal, which is likened to an axe. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. You understand a tree can get chopped down by an axe.
Right.
But the kicker comes in, and my teacher would always say this: if the tree is very big and very strong and the axe is very small, you're not going to chop that tree down. That tree is still going to win that exchange. It's exactly as you've just said.
Right.
Yeah.
And we actually have variation of 5 elements training, but it's not like Pi Beng Heng. Yeah.
If you enjoy the Drunken Boxing podcast as well as all the other Mushin martial culture endeavors, please do support us if you can at patreon.com. We have 2 support tiers there that you can pledge to help us continue to do the work that we do and continue to bring you the podcast as well as all our other works. If you would like to make a once-off tip or donation to our endeavors, please visit the link listed in the show notes or scan the QR code here. Thank you to everyone who supports us.
So it's basically what we're looking to do is to be able to recognize with the utmost precision. And this is where we start to talk about the cross, right? Because from that point, if that point is the definition of where our center is, then from the center, you should be able to divide the circle into 4 even quarters.
Right.
Right. So that gives you like the cross. Basically, if you can picture, because from that point, that means that you can pivot, like, let's say side to side or forward and backward. Mm-hmm. You know, if that center point is the highest point on the top of the ball, right? Then I can pivot forward and backward, or I can pivot side to side.
And that would lessen that value either way.
Right. And, or I should say, or, if you have the right skill, that you can try to balance it so that it creates the effect as if it was perfectly flat. That, in other words, what that does is it prevents your opponent from being able to have a pivot point.
Okay.
And also will create, like what they would talk about, like no landing.
Right.
So, but like I said, is the goal is to, because when everybody has the experience of, as they train, they get better, and things start to click, that you're able to repeat the same skill, let's say, easier, right? But it becomes habitual at a certain point, right? Yeah. And then the more that you train that into a habit, like the harder it is for you to be able to act outside of that like pre-programmed movement pattern.
But you've also become so highly aware and sensitive through this training. So that's why, I fully understand the naming is the art of awareness, because that's basically what you're striving to be able to identify and feel as accurately as possible.
Right. And and that's the objective anyway. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but you want to get down to where, and that's what I was saying, what like Steve was saying, is like to where the nature itself speaks to you, or the point itself tells you what to do. Right? Full or empty. Right? Full, I flow into the empty. Right? Or if you're trying to create like a gap because you're trying to pivot, I neutralize your action by flowing into the empty. Or I can just attack the full directly, because I know that I have more power than you. Right? And so just coming back full circle now is that, like I said, that at a certain point you start to see that if you want to progress to the next level, it's not really anything. I mean, you still need to train physically, but it's not anything physical that's holding you back, provided that you have a healthy body, right?
Right.
It's the mind, it's the awareness,
yeah,
is what's holding you back, because you really don't see the point as clearly as you think you do, right? Or as clearly as you want to. And so that's when we started to go, more to the temple, at Maba, to do some meditation retreats under Jiru, and to start to do more seated meditation, And that's actually built into the curriculum as well, where in order to qualify for certain ranks, you have to have completed, like a 3-day meditation retreat and then a 7-day meditation retreat.
Okay.
Because Sifu had always understood that at a certain point, you have to basically train the mind directly,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
but that always has to be backed up by the physical. And like I said,
Yeah.
even with Jiru himself, has a very physical, embodied approach to mindfulness training.
Right. Right. Well, I think if we kind of try to come full circle through your experience and your understanding at this point, what would you say constitutes, and I don't like this term to be honest, but it does have merit if you look at it the right way, what an internal art is?
Can I ruffle some feathers?
Yeah, go.
There should be no such thing as an internal martial art.
I agree.
Like, if it's complete, it should have internal and external,
Yes.
right? But I know that's going to make a lot of people mad. But there it is.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's also an aspect of refinement, and refinement includes all of those aspects. You can't have deeper refinement without all of those aspects. You kind of get to a limit if you're just focusing on one or the other. So refinement and depth naturally leads us all, doesn't matter which martial art you're doing, you'll get to a very similar place.
Yeah, because again, so like that's what Sifu was talking about, is that like what can you do that's different? Nothing, because we all have the same, within the variation of individual and racial differences in terms of the skeletal structure. More or less, we all have the same skeleton, same muscles, same ligaments, same tendons. Gravity is the number one force
And we all have to deal with.
that we all have to contend with. So as a human being, we're limited by our formation.
Well, as a human being on Earth, and I think that's also what people kind of forget, we're all living not only as similar human beings, but we're all living under the same physical constraints of what this planet gives us, and gravity is a big part of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So the laws of physics, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's like what one of Sifu's famous sayings. He says, "There's no freedom in nature, but to harmonize with nature is to be the most free." Right? It gives you the most freedom. Because it's like you, and again, coming back to his time at the temple, I think it was a famous monk, but he asked him, he goes, why? He knew Sifu was a Kungfu guy, and he said, why do Kungfu guys always try and imitate the animal? The tiger has the claws and the fangs, and the eagle has the wings. He goes, what is the superpower of the human being? He said, it's the mind. It's the mind.
Yeah, right.
The mind is that's what you need to train. And so, yeah, it's like coming back to this idea of no freedom in nature. It's like you're not going to sprout wings and fly over the roof, right? And so part of like our approach to understanding Tai Chi principles is that yin and yang have a limit, right? And so part of the process of Tai Chi principles is trying to find out exactly where the limits are,
right? So
that you can balance. And so, like, again, coming back to because the human body is a set formation, outside of the fact that, I'm going to grow older. And so my body is going to deteriorate over time with age. But I'm not going to sprout a second head or grow additional arms, and I can't detach my, like a Power Ranger where I can punch you from 100 yards away because I can detach my fist, right? It's like my hand is attached to my wrist and so on back to attached to my spine. So it's like all of these limits are what you really need to be looking into so that you can really understand how to use the tool based on its intrinsic nature.
Yeah. I mean, those are pretty universal, pretty deep, profound terms, ideas, concepts that I think overlap with so many of the arts that try to reach similar goals, but through differing paths. It's interesting you mentioned the term Tai Chi, well, the art Tai Chi. It's also one of my pet hates is seeing how people translate the idea of Tai Chi. And it's often like, oh, it's the grand ultimate fist. It's like, you've completely missed the point.
Missed the point, right?
Yeah, completely missed the point of what it's trying to tell you. But yeah, I mean, I think you're lucky that you had the experiences that you did with your teacher and finding him and being able to work down this path. There's a lot of people that, by no fault of their own, just met the wrong people at the wrong time and walked down the wrong path, and they're so far down that path that I don't know, what they would do with it.
Well,
What do you?
especially
Yeah,
once once you've got a fair amount of your self-worth invested into your identity, like invested into your training. I mean, that's very difficult to let go of that. But what were you going to ask?
I was gonna say, what are you currently doing in Arizona with regards to your endeavors with the martial arts directly?
Well, I have a small group of students that I'm working to get them trained up, and including my youngest son. And so I'm always looking to try to grow my school. If for no other reason than because we already talked about, things change, right? It's like people
Right.
people come and go for no reason that's outside of their control, right? It's like, so if you and it was the same reason why I started teaching to begin with. It was I didn't really necessarily want to teach, but I needed people to train with.
Yeah.
And so if I was gonna, I had to train up my own training partners. Is basically, what it boiled down to, and so that's how it started. And so yeah, at this point, I'm trying to expand that to, where it could be something that is self-sustaining. It's like what I would like is, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, that I-Liq Chuan in Arizona would continue beyond me. And because I feel exceptionally lucky with my career with martial arts. It's like it's given me through Sifu. I've had some amazing opportunities that I would never have had otherwise. Right. So say I've been able to travel to quite a few countries to teach, help run training camps, and meet. This really comes down to the people.
Yeah.
You end up meeting some of the most amazing people who just improve the quality of your life in ways that you can't even imagine. So really that at the end of the day, I mean, I can't tell you like how many of my best friends over the last 20 years, or some of the people that have had the most profound impact on me, Sifu being chief among them. I can't think of anybody in my life that's had as much influence on me as he has.
Right.
So that's why I want to continue, because there, at the end of the day, this is, and it sounds cliche. It's a trope, like, oh, it's a tool for self-development. It's a tool for, but Zen itself is a tool to understand how to die. But in that process, you understand how to live.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, that this I-Liq Chuan is such a great tool for that process. It really is, because again, just the way that the curriculum is structured, and how direct, and again, because it's an embodied approach. And one of the things that we talk about is, why is martial arts such a great tool for training the awareness? And it's because at the end of the day, either you got hit or you didn't. And if you got hit, there's a gap there in your awareness that you missed something. You missed the change.
That's very well put, actually. It's not simply a gap in your movement; it's a gap in your awareness. Awareness first and foremost.
That's why I was saying, it's like at the end, there's a glass ceiling there, that until the only way to move that ceiling further is through training the awareness, training the mind.
Right.
Because like I said, it's that what happened? Something changed. You didn't notice that it changed, and then you got hit, right? Or you got off balance, or you got swept, you got thrown, you got taken down.
Yeah.
Because it's one of the things, another one of Sifu's famous sayings, where he says that it's, your future is in my present.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, because he's already extended his attention. Like, it's not, I don't want to say extend, because it has a sense of being like out, but it's that he is perceiving like radar, right? How big is your radar? You have a stronger radar, you get the ping sooner.
Okay.
It's like in a way of talking about it is like, okay, you're on the ground floor and I'm on the roof, and I call down to you. I said, the bus is coming, and you look out the window, and but because from your position at ground level, you can only see
so far.
So far. But because I have the high ground, I can see much further. You say, no, the bus isn't coming. You say, yes, the bus is coming. I see the bus is coming right now.
Yeah.
But to you, it's not coming. So
you're not aware of it yet.
Right. You're not aware of it yet. But I can see it already coming from a mile away.
Yeah.
And that's all. That's from training the awareness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so, like I said, that's why this is such a good tool for that. And then, so like Sifu said one time, he said, if the students come, I'm very happy. If the students don't come, I'm very happy. Because you have that kind of like immovable mind.
Right.
Right? That physically, it's tough to move you off your center. Mentally, it's also tough to move you off your center. And so I'm not going to pretend that I'm there yet. But at the same time, especially like over the last couple of years, right, with all that craziness that we had, I was able to deal with that in a way that I don't think I would have been otherwise if I didn't have the tools that I had developed through my I-Liq Chuan training.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the crap that we went through here as well, it was the martial arts and the skills developed through those that just kept me grounded and able to deal with it all, for sure.
Right, because like I was saying about, Zen, like Zen is learning how to die.
Yeah.
But in that process, you really learn how to live.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of tools to be able to manage the different things that I was experiencing, over the last couple of years. And so like I want to share that with other people too. It's
Oh,
valuable.
that's great.
It's a valuable tool. So I'm teaching my classes, and it's been a while since I've done any traveling workshops, but I used to do a bunch of those, and I'm also I do some remote instruction if people are interested in getting in touch with me about some of that kind of stuff. And actually, I have some people that I've actually been able to. I was really surprised at if somebody that has a partner that they can work with.
Yeah.
And then I can coach them
Even remotely.
From remotely. And again,
if anything, as you said, the last couple of years, we've also learned methods to deal with the limitations of the current situation to the best possible way and continue learning, teaching. And there are ways to do it.
Right.
They might not be as great as being in person, but it's still very doable. So it's something that's opened up a new horizon.
Yeah, and then because also the way that I think about it too is it's like priming the pump, right? So that, okay, you're in Beijing, so I work with you remotely, or maybe you and a partner remotely, and then once a year you're able to take a vacation and you come over here and see me. And I have some international students right now that they do that. And we're able to get much, much more out of the time that we do spend in person, even though it's limited, because of course remote learning has its limitations, right? Because at the end of the day, like the art has to be transmitted through touch. But if we can get like 80% of the preliminary stuff out of the way, so that once you show up in person, we're already like speaking the same language, we already have the same technical reference points. So if I say absorb and project, or if I say open and close, like you already know what I'm talking about. Yeah, and then so it's actually been a really rewarding experience.
That's great.
So that's also an option. So that's basically what I'm doing. Right now I'm trying to my mission right now is to try and polish off a business model that makes this viable. That I want to share it back with the I-Liq Chuan community, so that everybody's able to go and open up gyms and be able to keep the lights on.
I get it. Yeah. That's a great initiative. So I think what we need in Chinese martial arts in general, but especially in arts that are well developed, have great value. That's not to talk bad about other arts, etc. I'm just saying that people that have put in the time and the effort to develop something that is truly beneficial, we need to try get those spread as far and as wide as possible. All of these endeavors are just good for Chinese martial arts in general.
Yeah, and it's like, I think we talked about this a little bit before, I think, but it's like this where it's like the technology works both for and against us.
Exactly.
But hey, you know what? It brings us to be together, right? It gives us this opportunity to be able to talk like this, and so
exactly.
It can't be all bad.
Exactly. Well, let's leave it on that note then. It's been really great hearing about your background and about your art and the philosophy and methods behind it. I think a lot of people are going to find a lot of interest and value to this discussion. What we'll do is I'll get your whatever contacts and info you want shared, and then I'll put it in the description under the podcast episode. And I wish you all the best with your endeavors, and hope to be in touch soon. Maybe one day even in person.
Agreed. Maybe when you get settled in after your move, I'll come over and visit you, and you can show me around.
Sure. My pleasure. We'll do that for sure.
Yeah. As again, like I know we're trying to wrap up here, but just talking about like what ends up being like one of the best takeaways of this experience through Chinese martial arts is just ends up being the amazing people that you get to connect with, and I definitely put you in that category. So I really appreciate you having me on today, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. We need to find a way to just communicate more regularly.
I agree. And the pleasure is all mine. It's been great, and we'll be in touch soon.
All right, sounds good, Byron. Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
I appreciate you, bro.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.